welcome. Welcome to everyone. Good afternoon again. Hello, John. We are very happy to start with the afternoon session of the Global Progress Program annual meeting. Due to COVID rules, this room isn't guesting as many people as we would like, and we're waiting for big delegations to come in, so we couldn't really have all the people that asked to be here. But there are the people that matter to us, which is the panel that I'm going to introduce. We are very much looking forward to hear how Generation Z is going to deal, and what Generation Z is going to tell us about climate change and the commitment from the progressive in this sense. So I welcome on the stage Fatima Adid Jibrin from France. Please, come. Francesca Caldari, benvenuta. Kevin Patel. Emma Dessaram, and they're moderated by Mette Cobain from My Life, My Say. I think this is, me personally, I'm very much looking forward to hear what you have to tell us. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much. Before we do start the panel, I did want to introduce someone who has played an important role in making sure that we're able to get the young leaders who've come all over from Europe and different parts of the world to be with us here today. I wanted to introduce Dawn Nakagawa from the Burgoyne Institute, who's going to talk to us about the Yes campaign.
Thank you, Mette. So for all of you who were on the panel this morning or at the event this morning, some of this will be repetitive, but the Burgoyne Institute has been working hard at kind of selling a program called YES, which is Youth Environmental Service, to governments around the world, trying to convince governments that it's time to put the reins of the climate fight into the hands of young people. And the reason to do this is it's their future that's at stake. They understand it. I think they're climate natives in a way that older generations are not. And that they're going to they need the skills and the tools to deal and reckon with this problem in a real way, and they will likely have to for the rest of their lives. In so doing, we do believe that it's really important that young people actually shape these programs. These cannot be top-down if they're going to be effective. And therefore, we've been organizing youth roundtables in different parts of the world and delivering the recommendations that come out of them in the voices of young people to the policymakers who can affect the changes and perhaps institute sort of civic service programs in their communities. So with that in mind, so we try to walk the walk, not just talk the talk. We bring young people together and really try to find from them how they think about climate, what it is that they would like to see happen, how would they like to be empowered, what do they think needs to happen next. So in that spirit, we've brought together this amazing panel. So I want to thank Kevin, Francesca, Emma, and Fatimata in advance, and Mette, of course. Mette is the founder of My Life, My Say, and so this is his jam. This is what he does. He helps young people find their political voice. That's the work that they do. So we couldn't have a better moderator. So thank you so much, and thank you all for being here, and thank you for all your insight.
Thank you very much, Dawn. I must admit, I feel like the old person on the panel. Now, I usually go to these conferences around the world being the young one, and also I'm wearing a suit, so yeah, it feels very awkward and different to be on this side this time. Thank you, Dawn, and to the Burgoyne Institute for collaborating and working with My Life, My Say to make this happen, and of course, thank you to Matt and the team at Global Progress for giving such an important space for young people to be leading the conversation. I know, having been at the summit over the past 2 days, a lot of you have been really keen to listen to the voices of young people. So we're very, very happy to be doing this. Before I start the introductions, just by way of introducing myself, my name is Mette. I've got a few different hats on. I lead My Life, My Say, which is all about trying to empower young people to have a voice in democracy. And I know so many of you have been supportive of our journey over the past 5 to 10 years, including David, who's here with us today, John, Matt, lots of you, Marcus, who've been extremely supportive of our organisation. Without you, we wouldn't be where we are. I'm also a councillor in the London Borough of Hackney, neighbouring borough to David. It's better than Tottenham. Don't tell him that. And the cabinet member responsible for energy waste, transport and public realm, which leads on our response to tackling the climate crisis. But you're not here to hear from me. You're here to hear from these amazing young people that we have with us here today. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick round of introductions, and maybe you want to say a few things about yourself before we start the session. Cool. So starting on my left, we've got Francesca Caldari, who is the United Nations International Development Project and Program Manager at the UN World Food Programme. As well as that, she's also the Italian delegate for the Y20, particularly on inclusion and equal opportunities, which is obviously led by the G20 process, and that's extremely important for young people to have a voice in that, especially this weekend. And of course, she's an alumna at the University of Bologna, having studied a master's degree on international relations, and does lots of other things as well. We've got Kevin with us here today, who, you know, I don't even need to introduce him. You could probably just search him on Google and put his name, he'll come up on Wikipedia. He's got so many things that he's doing to give young people a voice, particularly on climate change. He joins us from Los Angeles, my second favorite city after London. And he's the founder and executive director of One Up Action International. He's also a UN Together Band ambassador for Goals 7, 13, and 14, as well as also, you know, leading on various different projects locally and across the globe. And I know you've got a big presence at COP26 as well. And also, an interesting fact, we've discovered he's got 400 lanyards. Yeah, so we were talking about lanyards, random conversation, and he's added his 400th one to the list, so that's great, yeah. And then next we've got Fatima, who is joining us from Paris, and who we've also met in the Athens Democracy Forum as well. Very pleased to see you here. A student who's studying politics, business, and law in France. Massive advocate on human rights, particularly on climate justice, and I know she's going to be talking a lot of work, particularly building on what David was speaking about today at the climate just transition conversation that we had, and with a big emphasis on the global south as well. And then finally, we've got Emma from the UK, so one of my fellow Brits who's on the panel with me, who's from Dorset, a very different place to where I'm from, who's a student at the University of Exeter, also a campaigner for Green New Deal Rising, which is focused on trying to, you know, shift politicians to really push them towards transformative policies on climate change. So we've got a huge and fantastic panel with us here today. So can we just give a massive round of applause before we do kick up? Right, guys, so we're here to talk about climate change. Of course, you know, it's G20 this weekend, so leaders are going to be coming around the world to talk about what they can do going forward. We're obviously living through a pandemic, and then we've got COP starting in the UK next week. So I just wonder, before we do kick off the meat of the conversation, if I start with you, Emma, very short and brief, what would be the one thing that you would like to see that comes out of COP?
I think the main thing that comes out of COP is going to be not only looking at the policy outcome, but who's making the policy. I think with all these things, it's not just focusing on the outcome, but whose voices you're listening to and who's around the table. So I think if you're going to COP, you need to see it as an act of solidarity, that you're going there and listening to Indigenous people, people in the Global South, people whose voices aren't often heard at these conferences. So I think it's the thing I want to see out of COP is who's making the policy, not necessarily what the policy is.
Fab. And I guess that nicely leads on to Fatima, who's going to tell us more about what she wants to see for the Global South.
Yeah, so in terms of the Global South, I think, first of all, be given a seat at the table. For a very long time, the Global South was silenced. The policies that the Global South we're forced to enforce. We're not inclusive. I'm just going to give you a very quick example right now. I don't know if any of you have smart cars. I'm not trying to change your opinion, but if you look at smart cars, these are things that are electrical, okay? And when it came out, it was an innovation. It was supposed to be, you know, fight for climate change. Yet when you look at these things, they're not contextualized in terms of Africa. They're not contextualized in terms of the global south because those countries don't have self-sufficiency in electricity. Then again, that's one, it's not adaptable. Two, when you look at it as well, where are these coming from? The smart cars, you have batteries from lithium. So you're not thinking about the repercussions on the global south. You have lithium in Ecuador, Chile, in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and you're not having accountability for those minings, which are also creating chaos and havoc and ruining the nations and the livelihood of those people as well. So seats at the table to speak and represent ourselves.
Seat at the table. Great. And Kevin, what is the one thing that you'll be looking to come out of COP? I know you're there for 2 weeks.
Yeah, I guess for me, it's not only a seat at a table, but decision-making power for the global south, right? And for the most marginalized communities and people affected by climate change now. So for far too long, you know, people who have been affected by climate change have been not only left out and not getting a seat at the table to speak on the issues that they're going through, but not given the opportunity to make the decisions on behalf of their communities or their countries. And so I think that there needs to be a global shift in towards of not only including people at the table, but also making sure that they have the power to make their decisions on behalf of, you know, wherever community they're coming from. Another thing that I would say is that who better to solve the climate crisis than those who are being affected by the climate crisis now? I think that is a conversation to be had as well, is that the people who are being directly impacted by the climate crisis know what is going on in their communities, knows what is going on in their countries, and I'm sure that they can come up with the solutions as we have seen from a lot of young people.
Fab. So more decision-making powers for young people particularly, and obviously those who are often overlooked. And Francesca, just very quickly from you, what would you like to see come out of COP?
Well, I would echo what my fellow activists here have said and add that beyond strengthening commitments, I would like to see some concrete results. So something in terms of achievements and, of course, more cooperation with developing countries, echoing again what Fatima has said. So yeah, seeing countries working together. So the world's most advanced economies, of course, can do and should do what is in their powers, but also work hands in hands with developing countries.
Yeah. Great. Well, thank you. I mean, I want to pick up on something that, sort of a theme that has come out of it, which is particularly around sort of, you know, the work that you all do in your sort of day-to-day sort of lives, which is all about the role of young people. You know, I remember sort of trying to get a conversation about climate change and environment going 5, 6, 10 years ago, and it was very difficult to sort of bring people into the room beyond a certain group of people who, you know, wanted to talk about this issue and saw it as a priority. But what has changed over the past 5 years is that young people have really led the way in, you know, banging on about climate change, which has shifted, obviously, our leaders to start to see it as a priority. So I just wonder, Emma, if I can come to you. I mean, you do a lot of work, you know, really trying to, you know, push politicians to move towards more transformative policies. What role do you specifically see for young people within this wider context and in these conversations that we're having around, you know, addressing climate change?
I think that young people, like, we're going to be dealing with the brunt of this. I think to see the issue of climate change through the lens of weather is a privilege. But for us, this is our future. So we need, like, system change, like, now, because we're the ones who are going to be dealing with the consequences, picking up the pieces, thinking about, like, children. Like, if we have children, do we want children? Because do we really want to put them through this? So we need a seat at the table. We need to be listened to, like we are, hopefully now, because we're going to be dealing with it, so we need to be having the power, we need to be empowered to make the decisions, ultimately, not only to be heard in a tokenistic kind of way, like putting us up on a stage and listening to us, but actually giving us like decision-making power, and extending that to actual like reform, like voting age lowered now. You know, you don't have to be a genius to know how to vote and to know what you're voting for. So we need not only to be heard, but to be given that power.
Yeah, and Kevin, if I come to you, I mean, you spoke about, you know, having those decision-making processes and structures, which is what Emma's been alluding to. What does that look like for you? So when you want power, what sort of power do you want to be able to address this issue?
Yeah, of course. I just want to address something, actually. You know, I think there's a notion of that young people are the future of tomorrow. But I think that notion is wrong. We're not the future of tomorrow. We're the future of today and tomorrow. Because currently we're coming up with the solutions that are solving today's global inequities and injustices that are happening to, you know, global communities. So a lot of the solutions that have come out are coming from young people. And so it's about listening and actually going forward and implementing the solutions that are coming out of young people. I'm going to go to Mete's question now of how I see young people really coming into and what the role of young people is in policy. And I think as I was just saying, young people are not only coming up with the solutions. If we were to give them the seat, and what I did in Los Angeles is come up with the first ever Youth Climate Commission. It was the first one ever in the nation, first one ever in the entire world. It's never been done before, where it's a body of young people coming together to propose law and motions on the climate crisis. And it can be done in any country, in any city, giving young people the active role of actually coming up with, you know, global policy is, you know, life-changing.
Yeah, so true. And Francesca, you know, often when we talk about young people having a seat at politics or in decision-making, I think there's always an assumption that young people are one big homogenous group, but it doesn't really recognize the intersectionalities that exist. You know, you're not just one big group, right? And obviously you do a lot of work around sort of women's empowerment, particularly. And I was just wondering, what role do you think that has in this context and the debate that we're talking about?
Well, that is a very good question. Of course, the fight for climate change, we all know that it disproportionately affects like, specific categories, vulnerable groups, for instance. I'm referring to women, for instance, so young women especially, but also women with disabilities or people with disabilities in general, indigenous people. So people with a vulnerable background are should be at the center of the attention in the negotiations on climate issues. How can that be ensured? Well, first of all, people should speak up. People should make some noise. We've seen that youth movements and association can start from very little and can grow, and one single voice can have a huge impact. And of course, I'm thinking about Fridays for Future at the moment and other movements. But also, it would be important to institutionalize those youth movements. So, yeah, departing from thinking that activism is the only way. I mean, there are official channels, there are institutional channels that should be leveraged. So, for instance, the Youth 20 process that I've been part of this year is a perfect example in this sense. Giving the chance to young people, underrepresented people, vulnerable categories, to be linked directly to global political institutions is absolutely crucial. Now, of course, there are also categories that cannot speak up for themselves, and in that sense, political institutions have to play their part. They have to provide all the possibilities to, for instance, to access finance to women. And I'm thinking now about giving women the possibility to manage natural resources in grassroots and rural contexts. Only with like ad hoc measures, it would be possible to concretely have everything at the same table and, yeah, make sure that concrete actions are taken also to involve the people that are yeah, mostly suffering from climate change effects.
Yeah, so true. By the way, if you're seeing me roaming through my phone, it's not because I'm doing other things. This is the Gen Z way of moderating a panel, so just FYI. I just thought I'd let you all know. Fatima, I wanted to come to you because we're hearing a lot around, so there's a theme growing here, which is about the role, the voice that we need as young people, so the seat at the table, the decision-making power, recognizing the intersectionality. Now, obviously, you as a young woman, a young black woman who's from Paris, from Niger, you know, you face challenges in many different ways to what I would face. It's not common to have people like you in spaces like this to be talking to so many important people. So I just wonder, how do we break those barriers? And within this climate change, do we need more voices like you? How do we break those barriers to get more and more people like you who are more likely to be disproportionately impacted by climate change, and particularly when we're talking about the global south?
I think, first of all, the fact that I am here and I am speaking, and the fact that this is rare and this is a social norm is not acceptable. In the 21st century, I think, first of all, our predecessors have failed us. That's a common fact. Second of, is just, at this point, it is our burden, and I don't believe that it should be the burden of the future generations. Kevin, like you said, this is something we need to fix now. To go back to your question, I think we need to deconstruct the definition of climate change. A lot of times, climate change is put in its own box, thinking that it is its own dilemma, it is its own thing that needs to be figured out alone. This needs to be deconstructed because, first of all, it is intersectional. It's not mutually exclusive with any other thing. Poverty has foundations in climate crisis. Food insecurity has foundations in climate crisis. Lack of habitat has foundations in climate crisis. And these are things that are not shed light upon, for example. The fact that I am here and that I am speaking, like I said, is not normal. And the fact that everybody is wowed by it as well is not normal. The seats at the table as well, coming from I'm gonna speak probably on a personal level as well. I think that what needs to happen is that people just need to wake up to it. People need to go out and march. There's something I say is that there's not enough space in jail to put everyone in, regardless of if the governments don't listen to us. I think that this is a part where we speak up and we act. The traditional and cultural values of how we need to listen to our authorities, at this point, we need to do away with them because it's not working. We need to find new sustainable manners in operating, and most especially, we need to include all of us.
Absolutely, yeah. And Emma, if I can come to you, just kind of building on that, you know, we often talk about environmental justice sort of not being separated from social justice, and you, as a campaigner, one of the things that you continuously advocate for is obviously, you know, tackling the climate crisis, but underpinned by social justice. And I just wonder if you could talk to more about why you think that social justice is so important, that social justice is at the heart of this conversation.
I think, as I said earlier, to look at climate change through the lens of privilege is, through the lens of the weather is a privilege. And it's completely overlooking the fact that people do not, I'm talking working people, people from, I'll speak for my hometown, Blandford, rural North Dorset. People have limited horizons when it comes to climate change because they are having to live week by week. As policymakers, you kind of have this privilege of thinking a 2030 vision for carbon neutral. That means nothing to a lot of people because they're just living day to day, bill to bill, paycheck to paycheck. To give you an example, in my hometown, we're gonna start a campaign to make school uniform more affordable because school uniform at the school I used to go to is just ridiculous. And it's when you're having to work to send your child to school in an acceptable uniform so they can get an education, you're not thinking about climate change and the IPCC report and predictions of sea level rises, because you're just wanting to like send your child to school and get a good education. So I think before we address climate crisis and protecting the planet, we need to be protecting people. We need to be, and how do we do that? Like, 4-day working week, like they've just done that, like they're trying in Scotland. Do that because it gives people the capacity to broaden their horizons, spend more time in nature, make those connections, feel happier, and then we can all start, we can't start working together before we're on the same page, before we've leveled the playing field. We cannot be working together to protect the planet because we're not coming from the same page. To give you another example, the week before I left to go to Rome, on the train, by the way, did not fly. I went to like a community coat sale. Basically, there were just loads of donations for like Afghanistani refugees, like in my hometown, and they had like loads of coats left over, and people were just buying like coats for like very little. And it's just like, why are people in my hometown like donating to show solidarity, like having to like to do that, and then like not to be able to afford like their own new coats because there were families there, and it's like knowing that they couldn't go out and buy a new coat, and it's just like I've kind of grown up in this town and just like I've lived, like I see it, but I've come from a privileged position, luckily, to be able to like see it from that perspective. But my like social justice work, my climate justice work, comes from that position of leveling the playing field before we tackle climate change. Yeah.
Did you want to quickly come in? Because I've got a question for
Yes.
Francesca and Kevin.
Definitely, really quick. I think a lot of people are also not aware that they're living within this climate crisis. I think that there's a discrepancy in the way you coin climate change in itself, because talking to local farmers back in Niger, they talk to me about flooding. They talk to me about crops burning from the sun. They talk to me about not being able to know when rain happens because there used to be a pattern. And I think that the fact that there's no knowledge on that also does not even out the playing field, because you can come here and speak about climate crisis because I know what climate crisis is, I know what climate change is, but they don't know it, but they're living through it. So I think there needs, like you said, there is a need to level the playing field.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that we were scratching our head about earlier on today and yesterday when we were talking about climate justice and climate change is how do you kind of connect with people, right? Emma, you very eloquently sort of outlined the fact that people just don't even have, that people who've been impacted most by climate change probably don't even sort of understand the impact of or think about it in their day-to-day. So here's the question that I'm going to throw to you all, because we've been trying to figure it out, so maybe you can help out everyone in this room. How can we start to make this conversation more relevant to people who it's impacting day to day, and we need to bring along this journey with us to understand, one is how you can get a better job out of it, how we can help support you in terms of, reducing your lower energy bills, whilst at the same time, we're also addressing the wider issue of saving our planet. So I'll go to Kevin and I'll come round and then, yeah?
I think the word that has been thrown around right here, intersectionality, right? This issue is not only intergenerational, but it's intersectional. And if we were to connect the dots between all the injustices and inequalities that are happening all across the globe, we will be able to solve many of the issues, actually all the issues that are happening within these communities and the globe. To address the inequities in the sense of how communities are not aware of climate change, I think one of the things is I, at the age of 12, was directly impacted by the air and smog pollution in my community. But I connected the dots because I saw how many injustices were happening in my community of Los Angeles. And that might be one case study, but there are many, I feel like the people that I've spoken to, there are many people who are aware, but just don't know what to do in the sense of where to act and how to use their voices. So there are people who know about the climate crisis who just aren't sure where to go to really, voice their opinions on it. But then there does come the time of like those that are just unaware that they are going through it. So that's another thing that is like making sure that any conversations that we're having is inclusive to the fact.
Yeah. And Francesca, if I come to you, I mean, you obviously, both through your work through the United Nations, but of course, as a young delegate representing Italy, You meet loads of, fellow young people from around the world. You're continuously, I guess, talking about these conversations. Do you think that, one, is there a language barrier? So do you think young people understand the complexities that we face, or do you think politicians talk to people in a way that we understand? And also, the other question for you is, how can we mobilize more young people, particularly from sort of working across borders, to really bring about change on this agenda?
There is a language barrier, I would say, but it's more about the conversation between generations that Kevin was just mentioning. When it comes to the young, people do understand each other. People are on the same page. And I'll give you, again, an example regarding the Youth 20 process that I just took part in. There are plenty of youth associations around the world, in G20 countries, but not just in them, also in other countries. And we've seen, like, through a massive consultation process last year, how all these associations and young people are willing to come together and find, like, common solutions to issues. Through this consultation, we were in touch with more than 100 youth associations that were representing more than 1 million people, young people from around the world. And it was amazing to see how, of course, there were discrepancies, but we were able to find, like, common goals, and especially agreement on key priorities that we wanted to bring up to the G20 leaders and wanted them to discuss on. And these were sustainability and climate, beside equal opportunities, gender equality, and innovation and future of work. So all to say that there are networks, there are processes in place. People just need to know them better and create bridges. And in this sense, existing associations should be empowered to do more in terms of linking the young generations to the political institutions, to make sure that this language barrier can be destroyed.
Yeah. And one last question before I open it up to everyone with us here today to ask some questions. And feel free to jump in, anyone you want to. Are you hopeful? So are you hopeful that, one, we're going to get something out of COP that we need to have to save the planet, and two, the conversation doesn't just stop at COP, sorry.
I'll go ahead. I'm definitely optimistic, right? I think a lot of countries still have not met their marks, but there are a lot of local communities that are meeting the mark, that are leading on climate. And if we have a lot of local communities leading on climate, we could then pressure our global leaders as well as our world leaders to really start taking action on climate. And I really do hope the next 2 weeks, right, including from G20 and COP26, that something tentative as well as solution-oriented comes out of COP26. Given we only had, the Paris Climate Accord in 2015, and we were still agreeing on agreements today, and countries are still trying to find the mark of, like, should we agree on this? Should we not agree on this? So shortly, I think we can. I'm really optimistic. A lot of young leaders are bringing the solutions. A lot of young leaders are already acting on climate change. A lot of young leaders are already implementing and making impact. So yeah, I'm optimistic.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think I'm hopeful as well. I think that our leaders have seen the importance of climate change being climate justice. For a long time, climate change didn't fit within the political agendas, and now they know that in order to get our votes, it needs to be there. So they may care about it, they may not, but we now have the power to speak. We now have the power to act, and that is exactly what we're doing. And so I really hope that they're going to take that into consideration. I really want to see who's at the table, of course. I want to see how much their voices are being considered, and I want to see accountability. So, and I think we've been enforcing that, and I hope it happens for sure.
Yeah. And Emma, do you want to come in?
I am hopeful. I mean, I study history, and I've studied history of, like, revolutionary movements, rebellions, any kind of like social justice movements, and that's humbling, and it gives me power because I know that we've been in crises before, we've been in worse situations, and people get over them because they get together behind a vision and mobilize and make a difference. And I believe we can do that, and it's going to take everyone. So, yeah.
Thank you, man. Francesca, finally you.
Yeah, just a quick note to say that I'm also hopeful, of course. We have to be hopeful. There's the space for concrete achievements. And of course, there's just too much at stake at this point to not be hopeful. This is just a terrific momentum, I think. I mean, we're at the eve of the G20, COP26, all that is happening in terms of climate extremes all over the world. People have to act now, and leaders have to do something. So let's see.
Yeah, and I'm hopeful that with young leaders like yourselves, that we're not going to stop the pressure on making sure that we do have the right action moving forward. I wonder if we can now use this opportunity for some questions. I can see a hand up. Right, okay, there's loads of hands. Wow, great, fantastic. So if we start at the back over there, I think you might have to just, yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to repeat everything. I'm just going to go to my question, but thank you all. You're very amazing, is what I said before. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit how you think about engaging your peers in terms of youth turnout in elections and making sure that you are either on the ballot and your peers are on the ballot, or you are showing up at elections, because I really do not think that we can count on the people who are currently there. I think they're not getting the job done. And I think that it will only happen if folks with your opinion are actually sitting in the positions of power. So could you talk about if you think about that, or if it comes up with your peers, and I guess how folks like us could help you?
Great question. I'll do it in round of three. So if I go to Marcus and then Ryan.
Thanks. My name's Marcus. I work for a data company called YouGov, and I advise clients like political parties. So I want to treat you really seriously and ask you some tough questions. Namely, you're sitting at COP and you're saying that the climate change crisis is part of a much bigger crisis. A crisis of global power, a crisis of global wealth, all of these different things. That could give the politicians a really easy way to get off the hook. They could say, fine, we'll do this in 10 years' time then. And then back to Gemma's point, that means where's the accountability? How is this done fast enough? On the other hand, you could hold them to account for actions only immediate, in which case the actions would be too small because they're not sustained. So my challenge to you here is, what kind of action do you want to see coming out of COP26 that is both tangible and meaningful right now, but also transformational and meaningful in the long term? Because unless you've got demands like that, it's going to be very easy for the politicians on the other side of the table to slip out of the net.
Great question, Marcus. And we've got Ryan.
Ryan Wayne from the Tony Blair Institute. I just want to say again, thank you so much for your words today. I think they've been excellent and inspiring. Now, let's imagine then that the world has been listening and seen sense, and you guys are all installed as leaders of progressive parties in your respective countries. The general election is coming up, and you know that to win the election and be in power and therefore enact the important action you've talked about around climate change, you have to secure a majority. And that majority is going to come hopefully from young people, but also from old people as well, and maybe people who agree that we need to take action on climate change, but are a little bit scared about the action. You stand in front of the electorate, it's the day before the election. What do you say to these guys? How do you build that election-winning coalition around climate change?
Wow, we've got some really, really good questions. I feel like we should give a clap for the questions. Right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to maybe pick on you on who to go to based on what I know. So maybe Emma, if we start with Ryan's question about what do you say if you're the Prime Minister of the UK right now, or you're the aspiring Prime Minister, and you've got an election tomorrow or a week later, how do you reach out to those generations?
Is this to the final question?
Final question.
The final question. What would I say if I was the Prime Minister tomorrow? I'd say, okay, I'm going to pay you. I'm going to pay you and you're going to work less. And then you're going to be empowered to make changes and to get on board with environmental movements. And you're going to have the breathing space, not to just pay your bills and to have to just relax in that breathing space, but to join community groups, community organisations doing things around climate change, and you're going to be empowered, and you're going to have the energy to do it. So I'm going to say, if it was the UK, I'd say, you know, we're going to keep that £20 universal credit. I mean, that's a tiny example. We're going to give you, like, we're just going to improve your quality of life. We're going to help you to improve your quality of life. And then you're going to be able to engage with community projects. Like, for me, it would mean more time, like less time working at a cafe, more time working in a community garden, connecting with nature, connecting with the land, and then being able to be more engaged with, like, climate change and contribute to community, like, just projects. And yeah, that's what I would do. I'd say, I'm going to help you to have a better quality of life, a better state of mind. Like, you know, we're also in this mental health pandemic, and that's going to help you because you're going to have more time, you're going to be healthier, you're going to be happier, and then you can engage with climate change. So yeah, that's what I'd say.
Great. I think you wanted to say something, Kevin.
Yeah, I just wanted to add on to Emma's point. If we're investing in the communities that are directly impacted by climate change, or just investing in overall communities, we're overturning the barriers that prevented people to get involved in the first place, or even learn about climate change or these other social inequities that are happening to communities. And so in, you know, providing that pathway for people to not only have a better quality of life, they're in turn going to be able to learn about what is happening to do something about it. And so I think I just wanted to kind of make sure that people understood that we need to start looking at the climate crisis as not just one singular issue, but as an issue that, again, I'm hitting the ballpark on this, it is an intersectional issue and an intergenerational issue, because young people, you know, I think a lot of older generations have come to the young people and said, okay, well, you're the future of tomorrow, what are you going to do about climate change? And for me, it's like, no, what are we going to do about climate change? Because it's something that we both have to work towards to really solve this issue. But yeah.
Yeah. I love when Kevin said, oh, you looked at me. So, Ryan, what do you think? You're going to vote for Emma and Kevin? Yeah? Okay, cool. Fatima, I wonder if I could come to you and Francesca. I mean, feel free to jump in, and then we're going to come to the first question after, because I want you all to answer that one. What is it that you want to see now? What's the transformative policy that you want to see now that stops, you know, people who say, hey, we're going to do this in like 10, 15, 20 years' time? Answering Marcus' question.
I think I'd say stop mining in our countries. Be accountable of the multinationals you're sending in our countries. I think that I would probably tell them to create policies. If in 10 years you want to stop the mining of fossil fuels in your nations, don't bring it to ours. I think that there needs to be accountability. That's the main thing. And second of, there definitely needs to be inclusion. If someone is not represented, there needs to be someone that's going to go get that person. Don't speak for the nation, because I think that's coming from a point of privilege, but ask the nation to come and speak for themselves. Because I heard something, oh, we don't want poor people to remain poor. Right now they're dealing with their issues, so we're gonna find situations. I'm like, no, bring the poor people to the table and ask them what they need. So I think at this point, we need contextualization, we need adaptability, and we need accountability.
Yeah, great. Did you want to come into that one? Yeah?
Yes. No, I totally agree, and I just wanted to add that it would be very simple also just to listen to what people have to say. And I'm saying this because there are a lot of ideas going around from the young generations about like short-term plans to make some concrete achievements in terms of climate justice, for instance. And I'll just give you an example here. During the Youth 20 process, we drafted this communique that was brought to the G20 leaders. And that is a list of concrete steps that leaders can take to make some concrete achievements. Just one example, create community-owned and community-managed energy networks. These kind of actions are very basic and would be so impactful at the local level and would entail longer-term achievements as well.
Absolutely, yeah, for sure. And just to come back to the first question, because I think that's that's how you make change, right? Partly it's about voting, and it's about really turning up to elections and making sure that people know that you're there to be counted. So I just wonder if anyone had any thoughts and reflections sort of on how we can make sure that we mobilize more young people to turn up at elections, or are there things that you've seen that have worked really well? Kevin, you're from the US, where you had a huge youth voter turnout in this past election last year. So I just wonder if there's any things that you know of that's happened, or what you think we should be doing more to get more young people voting.
I guess it's the matter of fact that young people are really interested on these issues, right? If politicians and if even young people who are running, if they're running on the issues that matter to us the most, then we're going to be turning out to vote for these leaders. But I think it's also about, the faith that young people are being, put in. It's like, for the past election, in the 2020 election, we had to choose between someone that really didn't want to act on climate change and someone who bring a new faith to really act on climate change. And I don't know if I can say the names, but that really was the driving factor for young people to really get involved and saying, you know what, it's now or never. This is our time to have our voices heard. And that's the reason why we saw a huge voter turnout for young people, because they saw how important these issues are. Without that, we would have never seen young people actually turn out.
Yeah. So let me add an extra question onto the conversation that we're having. So Emma, if I was to ask you, what would you want to see from a prime minister? So what are the qualities that you look for when you're going to be voting?
Honesty. I think in answer to, can I answer the first question?
Sure, of course, yeah.
So in terms of, actually getting young people to get behind a party and an individual, I was at the Labour Party conference a month or so ago and the World Transformed Festival. And on the Saturday evening, we had a big bonfire, a bunch of us, young people from Green New Deal Rising and loads of other, Extinction Rebellion, loads of us. And because I'm a Labour Party member, and I will get behind them because I think it's the chance we have. But before that, we need proportional representation, but that's another matter. And I said to people, who do you vote for? It's something that we don't really talk about. And I was like, who are you going to vote for? And it was either apolitical or reluctant Green Party. I mean, in that evening, I managed to change a few people's minds, Labour Party, because we've got people like Nadia Whitmore, Zara Sultana, Clive Lewis, getting behind this Green New Deal thing, which I think is cool. And I'm trying to do a lot of work with Green New Deal Rising, make the Labour Party get behind this. And I think the more and more that parties can actually get behind issues that young people care about, that's how you're going to get people interested again and get people from these little groups on the left actually behind a big, an actual party and actually make change, because we need to actually mobilize, because otherwise the right are just going to keep on doing what they're doing and win and win. But we need to be getting behind something, also working for improved democracy, do it at the same time, and hopefully we can make some actual change.
Yeah. Did you both want to comment on that one?
I think I want to also add transparency. I think in this day and age, we need transparency. We need to know what is happening. We need to know how it's happening. We need to know who's speaking and why they're doing so. Coming from Niger, where the government is mostly corrupt, it's been a disillusionment for the youth. Most of them don't believe in politics, and so what we've been doing is raising awareness and also trying to get them to reconnect and see what could be done if it was reconstructed. I love to hear that you guys actually have, political systems that somewhat work. So to think that we try to reconstruct and see what could happen in a sense, and I think that's gotten a lot of youth to mobilize, especially because there's no more time. The problems that we save for later, well, later has happened and the urgency is here. There's human rights abuses, people are dying, it's the livelihoods of people. They no longer have habitats to live in, they no longer have food, and we just can't do anything but act right now.
Yeah, great. And did you want to?
Yeah. I just wanted to add that young people should be encouraged through concrete actions that would make them understand that their voices count. And this should be done by avoiding tokenism at all costs, because what we've seen like a lot recently is just, young people being granted a seat at the table, and not even that often. But yeah, that's just it. That should be avoided, and some more concrete actions towards trying to reconnect generations should be done. To make understand that there are ways to use the institutional channels I was mentioning just before to advance in climate justice.
Yeah, absolutely. And just maybe to put my 2 pence into this conversation as well. One of the things that we done in the UK, working with My Life, My Say in 2017 and 2019 elections, which saw an increase in young people registering to vote, is we worked with tech companies like Tinder and Uber, for example, because we know that lots of young people use those platforms. So for example, a week before the voter registration deadline, if you're swiping left or right on Tinder, you got a notification to say, hey, if you want to register to vote, you swipe right, and it took you to the government website. And we saw over 1.5 million clicks. Now, obviously, 1.5 million in the context of the UK is huge in terms of numbers. So I think there's a role for tech companies. So I guess the approach needs to be, rather than creating a space and expecting people to come to us, it's about identifying where young people go to in their day-to-day social and digital lives and think about how we can connect with them in those spaces. So another example is, one of the things we worked with the Berggruen Institute on is a concept called Democracy Cafe. And we have a partnership with Starbucks. And the idea is, over a Frappuccino, you could talk about politics in a less formal way without necessarily feeling the need to wear a suit or be in a sort of a formal setting. And these work really well as well. But I guess the important thing to recognize is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach. I think depending on the types of young people you're speaking to, or the geography that you go to, wherever you go in the country, there are different ways that work better with different groups, and that recognizes the intersectionality point that has been sort of alluded to. Now, I know we're short we've got 8 minutes left, and we still have to show a video. Am I right with thinking there's 8 minutes left? Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, cool. All right. So why don't we do another round of questions, and we're going to be very brief with our answers, yeah? So, any more questions?
I think we didn't answer the one about the actions at COP that we want to see.
Oh, sorry. I thought, okay, cool. Who wants to take that one? There you go, Kevin.
I should have just left it at that. But no, the actions from COP26, I think one of the things is, we can't get climate justice if our solutions aren't intersectional. We must have intersectional solutions to solve intersectional issues in order to really solve today's today's inequalities and the problems that we have. And so for young people, a lot of young people have quite a lot of demands, right? Getting rid of fossil fuel industries within the conversation, and they're gone. They're not involved in COP26 because of a huge coalition of young people fighting back. But it's also about making sure that the world leaders who are present at COP26 understand that the young leaders are wanting to have that that space to speak to them, right? And making sure that there's intergenerational dialogue happening about the solutions that are being presented or even going to be implemented.
Yeah, absolutely. And one final question from me before we wrap up. And whoever wants to go first, feel free to go first. But look, you've got very influential people in this room, right? These people help shape the thinking of many leaders around the world, or some of them are leaders. Everything they say carries weight. what is it that you want them to take away from this conversation today? What's the one emphasis that you want them to sort of, when they're going away and talking to people that they know or they're making decisions, what is it that you want them to get away from the session today? Emma, start with you.
I think the main thing you need to take away is that this isn't just a climate change panel. This is like a racial, economic, social justice panel. And we're representing the young people, not as a homogenous group, but we want to show solidarity with young people all around the world. So I think that wasn't a climate change panel. They were talking about, you know, systemic change and transformative policy. That's what I take away.
Very good point. Francesca, I'll come to you this time and then we'll go back this way.
I would say, yeah, something along the lines, those lines that Emma just said. Do not act in silos. Climate change is not just about climate change. It's about like solving the climate related issues means solving other issues, and in turn addressing other like social economic problems would help achieving climate justice. So yeah, do not disconnect things and try to address all the main challenges of our times all together.
Thank you. And Fatima, if I come to you?
I think I'll probably echo off of a lot of you guys, but don't put climate change in a box. It's everywhere. It's adaptable in all situations. Definitely, there's youth here who are experienced. Don't silence us. Look for us. Look for the different nations as well. Don't think it's global because you've been to 3 different nations. Seek contextualization, and most especially, I think, communicate. Try to listen to others. Listen to what these people are saying. Listen to how these people are living. And in one place, it might be a neighborhood that needs to be fixed. In another, it might be the livelihood of people who are put into question.
Yeah, and then Kevin?
With that being said, I would say the eyes are on us, right? The eyes are on you to really start including what the conversation that we all had on this panel of not only being intersectional with issues and the solutions, but making sure that there's conversations happening between both leaders and all of y'all that are here. But we don't have time left. We really need to act with urgency in solving this issue.
No, thank you so much for your contributions. And the reason why I asked you to answer that question wasn't because for the room to take away, but it was to make Brando's job easier, because he has to give a response later and give a reflection. So it was to help him. No, I'm joking. Of course, your voices matter a lot. Thank you so much. Can we give a massive round of applause to the panel, please? Now, before we invite Brando to speak on the panel to give a response, I believe we've got a video that we're going to be showcasing, so it should come on soon, I hope. There we go.
The youth perspective is so important because we are the future. You know, one day we're going to inherit this world and we're going to be the policymakers. We're going to be the ones invoking change, so we are really important to, you know, have conversations with.
Just listen to us.
The Youth Environment Service is a commitment to invest in the future of young people and the planet. Based on national service schemes, YES would employ young people to make the world more resilient to climate change, floods, fires and pandemics. Open and public discussions at community, local and national levels would design programs and drive policy.
I think hearing other people's perspectives has been super important. It's helped me change the way that I view things and shape my own ideas.
It's really great seeing all those different views at the same time and seeing the same problem but through a slightly different lens.
I'd like to work or collaborate with a policymaker in terms of telling them like my perspective, the perspective of my community.
This initiative has the potential to address the most damaging consequences of global warming and make our way of life much more sustainable. But it can also do so much more. It can develop young people's knowledge and leadership so that they can cope with unforeseen global challenges. It can build up skills and provide opportunity so that young people knocked down by COVID-19 do not become a lost economic generation. It can bring open and accountable deliberation back to policymaking and help restore democratic legitimacy.
You know, this is such an important event. It's really important to get our voices heard, and they're creating a platform. They've created this entire space for us to do that.
And it can build social solidarity and shared destiny among rising generations.
I really appreciated being brought together with a group of like-minded people and just meeting other people and hearing about their perspectives.
The fight that we need to fight together, and everyone here today has made me feel like that, and hopefully it can bring about change in a good way.
For young people, this moment is a challenge. We can use it to renew how we govern and how we live.
Well, that's perfect timing, 5:15. Massive round of applause, everyone. Thank you all so much. It was really, really insightful. And actually, you know, it was Emma's first time on a panel today. Didn't you think she done great? Thank you all. So now we're going to hand over to Brando Benefo, who's going to give us a response to what we've heard today. Massive round of applause for Brando.
Not easy to be the old millennial commenting on Generation Z, on what has been discussed today, but I will try very briefly to just say that it's crucial, the words that we choose. It's crucial to see what words we choose, and I think that when we heard that this is not just about climate change, but it's about climate justice, we have seen already the right words used, because the intersectionality and intergenerational aspect of this fight that we heard about is something that exactly this generation has only to teach us, to make us understand. So I can only agree to someone from the public who said that it's important that you bring your voice, your generation to the institutions, to those places where you decide. It's crucial so that, as I was saying with you yesterday when we met briefly, that you engage and you convince, if you believe it, and I hope you believe it, that you need to convince your generation to be able to get also the power to change things, to influence those in power, and to represent these fights in the places where they can be decided. I really believe that the vision that you shown us of a world where these big fights, these big issues for saving the planet are strictly intertwined with a lot of other battles, of other struggles that your generation is living in, wherever you live in the world. And especially here, I think it's very important thinking as a member of the European Parliament, how important it is that young people from European countries are able to build some common discourse together, because I'm trying to do it myself, giving a little contribution to that together with other people in the various positions in the European institutions. We are trying to lead on many of the topics you have been talking about. But we cannot lead this fight, so for climate justice, if we don't have a clear push, if we don't see priorities coming from people, and so from the younger generations, directed in the right way. And I think this was crucial. When we see that there has been criticism, for example, of the blah, blah, blah discourse of Greta. And that can be criticized from a politician point of view, because yes, it makes all together those who did well, those who did less well, and it's not, we can say, it's not getting into the specifics of what really has been the work for fighting climate change. But in the end, it's crucial that your generation is able to provoke, is able to push for a change in the mindset. I see it so much. And I see that what is today needed, in my view, is that your generation doesn't get disillusioned with the capability of this order of institutions, so especially of the democratic institutions, to be able to deliver. Because you talked in many of the points of the discussion about the issue of the long-term versus medium-term, even super short-term. We heard about people that live day by day, and so it's so difficult for them to think about climate change. And this is the issue of democracy too. Democracy compared to other political regimes can be seen as unable to program as much. But I think this is not true. It can be the best resilient system if we look at the perspective. But this means that we need strong democracies. And to have strong democracies, we need young people to be involved, not just by voting, but also by mobilizing, but also by voting. Let me conclude on that, because I think it would be a disaster if this mobilization is not able to find political representation. So let me bring this as the elected politician. It's very important that all this comes into representation in the democratic bodies. So thank you for inspiring us. I was inspired by many of the stories and your considerations that you made. And I'm sure that this was, I'm convinced, a very, very good first inspirational discussion towards the discussion we will hear later from our leaders. Thank you very much.
Okay, so I think we're off the stage now. Well, we've got a break. I think we've got a break. Okay, should we do a selfie on the panel? Yeah?
everyone. We're just going to get started in 2 minutes. If you could find a seat again. 2 minutes. Thank you.
So good afternoon to everybody. Grazie mille commissario, grazie mille Paolo Gentiloni per essere qua con noi in questo primo Global Progress dopo tanti mesi di virtualità, ma anche devo dire che il fatto che sia stato in Roma compensa abbastanza cose, perché Roma è una città fantastica. Anyway, we have 30 minutes. And I would like to articulate them into 2 questions, well, basically 1 question, 2 sides of this question, and a petition that I'll do you at the end, like a bonus track. And the obvious question is about the opportunity, because you had a fundamental role in shaping Europe's response to COVID crisis, a response that has to do with helping the transition of the digital and green revolution in a way that provides opportunities for the many and not the few, and a big investment in physical and social infrastructure in order to allow growth to be inclusive. I would like you to comment a bit on this potential huge once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, insisting as well in 2 aspects that I think are crucial. That would be the rewriting of the Growth and Stability Pact, the reshaping of the Growth and Stability Pact, and also the agreement on the international agreement on taxation, that I think it's an historic one.
Yes, well, thank you, and of course, buongiorno, buon pomeriggio a tutti. Great pleasure to that the fact that this meeting, Global Progress, is in Rome. It's for me also a very, very big opportunity to see my own hometown, but also a lot of friends that I am looking normally in TV news in the evening and not and not directly. Well, indeed, we have huge opportunities. I think that to frame these opportunities, we should give a look to where we were only a few years ago. And I think it's very clear that we spent a difficult time. We had a populist wave in several European countries, and not only European countries. This wave was also very strong in America. This was consequence of the migration crisis in the mid of the previous decade, economic insufficient or wrong response to the financial crisis, and also our difficulties. I think we all have in our minds what happened January the 6th in Capitol Hill in Washington. And this gave us also the dimension of the risk that we were running in the years behind us. And then to this fragile Europe, fragilized by this crisis, by the non-efficient response to the financial crisis, by the migration difficulties, by Brexit, by the populist pressure, in this Europe, the pandemic arrived. And this could have been a, well, something very serious and very dangerous for Europe. Personally, I think that the risk we ran was especially a risk of translating this new shock, this new crisis, in an enormous fragmentation among European countries, increasing the differences among them, making these differences non-manageable. And with an increase of these differences, the single currency, the European building would have been in very big risk. So I think we can be proud, the European institutions and many European governments, of the fast and strong response that was given. We remember that the first news of lockdowns came exactly from northern Italy in February the 21st in 2020. By the way, I was in a G20 meeting of finance ministers, as the one just attended this morning in Saudi Arabia. And I remember that when the news of these 12 small lockdowns came, it was the big overture of Financial Times, and all the ministers were asking, but what happens? Because until then it was a Chinese story, the pandemic. Then in March the 11th, the pandemic was declared, and 1 week after, the ECB took the right decision to stabilize financial markets, and 2 days after the ECB, the Commission took the right decision to suspend fiscal rules and state aid rules. These decisions made possible the enormous reaction of national governments, spending a lot of money. I remember in these days we were expecting a massive wave of bankruptcies and massive unemployment in Europe. Indeed, with all the money that was put on the table, we had the lower level of bankruptcies since years in Europe, and the labor market is very strange now to understand, because we have areas with massive unemployment, but many areas where you are not filling the jobs that are to be filled. So the reaction was extremely effective in cushioning this crisis, and it was enabled by the European institutions' decisions. And then came the Europeans' decisions first, and I think our political family should always remember strongly this. We were able to deliver on this sure mechanism, supporting short-time work schemes in European countries. And well, this was Enrico knows very well, a very old story in the European club. Several governments in the socialist family had proposed this kind of mechanism since 10 years. But then this concern of the crisis made possible to deliver 100 billion in support to these schemes, ERTE in Spain or Cassa Integrazione or others in other countries, And these schemes were able to support 31 million workers in Europe and avoid, according to our estimates, 2.8 million unemployed people. And then came the big decision of the next generation EU. You may remember that it was defined, by the way, by the German finance minister, our friend Olaf, that will join us in a few moments, as a Hamiltonian moment. Hamilton, the Treasury Secretary that built the federal budget in US, and then he was killed in a duel. But anyway, it's a big example of something extremely important. And many of us in the European institutions call this also a Copernican revolution, a Rubiconian moment, whatever. The fact is that indeed this incredible story of an emission of common debt to support common goals was possible. And this, I think, was because of a spirit of solidarity among member states. Solidarity also made easier by the fact that without this solidarity, the risk of divergence and too big difference would have been too large and too strong. So now I think we have great opportunities. We should ask ourselves, what are we looking for with these recovery plans and with this economic response, with this fiscal expansionary response? Are we only looking to a rebound in our economies, to go back to where we were? I think we should always repeat, and this is a duty for our political family, that we were not in a golden age, because the previous 10 years were years where not only growth was at low levels in Europe, but also the climate crisis was not addressed with sufficient energy, and inequalities increased and increased and increased continuously. So to go back to the previous situation is not our target. We are not looking for a rebound, we are looking for a different, durable and sustainable growth. And I think we have a probably unique in a life opportunity to go in this direction and to break the stalemate that we had in Europe of long period of low growth, low inflation, low interest rates, aging of the population, the Japanification of the European economy, as someone called it. So now we have an opportunity to break this scheme, to go beyond this scheme, if we have the right ambition in this, in using these recovery funds and this big opportunity. Of course, there is a second great opportunity, in my view, which is at international level. We all know that big crises, wars, economic crisis, pandemic in this case, have been frequently in our history the opportunity to change global rules. Our global rules are frequently shaped after big crises. And this is the case now. We have an opportunity after this terrible crisis to, thanks to many things that happened, the last positive one was the extraordinary victory of the SPD candidate Olaf Scholz in the German elections. But before this, what happened, of course, in America with President Biden election, we have an enormous opportunity. We already seized part of it, because tomorrow and Sunday, the G20 leaders will endorse this agreement on the new global taxation frame. which will be very simply giving the message that multinationals should pay their fair share of taxation, and they should pay this where they are doing their profits and not where they are deciding to establish their legal headquarters. They should pay their fair share, and they should do it where they are doing their profits. This is a big change in the international rules. And then I think we have at least two challenges. One is if we are able to change international rules, finding a global way of carbon pricing, which will be essential for the green and climate transition. You know that the European Union is putting on the table a proposal of the Union, which is this carbon border adjustment mechanism. But you should also know that this is not because we want to have a decarbonization in our own, but it is because we want to stimulate all global players to converge to global solutions. And then maybe, but this is more ambitious, we could also try to redesign our rules from the point of view of the measurement of our wealth, well-being, common goods. We still, after all the debates, we are still relying too much to GDP and too little to SDG and to the real well-being of our citizens. So indeed, big opportunities ahead of us, and the commitment of the progressive forces and leaders is, of course, crucial to try to seize these opportunities.
Sure, I completely agree with you that this is like a huge opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, also because I think we learned some lessons from the previous crisis, we Europeans, right, that we reacted too little, too late, and I think this time, fortunately, was different. Actually, I think we are inaugurating a social democratic momentum, progressive momentum, rewriting some rules as well, as you said, after a global crisis. Things get asked and rewritten. But you mentioned some. I think there are some challenges to that, and we have to be aware of them, right? It's obviously the populist and nationalist virus. It still lies at the heart of our politics, so that's a challenge. But I would like you to refer to another challenge that I think it's important for the next generation EU, which is implementation. And not implementation that arrives to or makes this plan real for the ordinary man, right? How are we going to get that? Because we're playing short-term and long-term, right? And you need to help the transition. Also, with all the, for instance, all the energy prices stress that we have right now, all the changes that we have to do, we're going to see them, you know, in a while, right? So for me, there's a risk of implementation and of popular support to this. And also because the next generation EU is a sequence of national plans. So this implies the success or failure of the plan will be national, in the contrast with, for instance, Biden's or US plans that success and failure will be American, right? And I think this poses a threat that we need to be aware, and it's a challenge for that.
Oh, I fully agree. It's a real challenge. You know that we have all the discussion on will these instruments be permanent or not? My answer is always, okay, in the design and the legal agreement, these are extraordinary instruments. I don't think we should cheat ourselves saying that they are permanent. They are extraordinary decisions. But at the same time, if we look to the experience of the building of the European project, we know very well that these extraordinary things, when they happen, if they work, they can be repeated. So the problem now is not to have a general discussion on the permanent or non-permanent, but is to make these things work. And I have to say that this is very much dependent also in the success of these plans in a certain number of countries, among them your country and my country will be crucial, of course. The only thing that because the point is that I don't think it's clear to our public opinion, and in some case even to our ruling classes and people with responsibility, that these funds are, as we say in Brussels, performance-based funds. They are not there. They are there months after months, semester after semester, if the targets, the timetable are respected. If they are not respected, it's very difficult for the European Commission to deliver on these funds. So I think this is a historical challenge for all of us. I was a couple of weeks ago in Washington meeting the former Secretary of State and now envoy on climate, John Kerry, and he's working in the Marshall Room in the old building of the State Department. Well, this is some sort of new Marshall Plan. From a certain point of view, even larger than the Marshall Plan was, but of course in a completely different environment in Europe, and with the money coming from our own resources. We go to the markets as European Commission and with an extraordinary success. All our emissions are oversubscribed 10, 15, 18 times. And they are also frequently in green bonds or social bonds. So this is something extraordinary. My concern is, are we really aware of this? Are we really discussing this with the importance that this deserves? I'm not sure. Especially, if I may say so, in my country, I frequently see the debate concentrating on several issues. Well, there are issues enormous, and it's absolutely right to be concentrated on them. Just think to people's rights and gender equality and the rule of law, what happened in recent days in this country. But overall, looking to the debate on economy, I frequently see attention concentrated in many different other issues, as if these 200 billions were already in our pockets, but they are not. And this is different in Spain, I have to say, because I was in Madrid in Monday and Tuesday, and the public debate is all on the recovery fund and the reforms connected to the recovery funds. That there is practically, this is the dominating issue in the Spanish discussion. It is not the case in Italy, and I think we should reflect on this, because maybe this is hiding a certain idea that this opportunity is given. It is not given. And we need it extremely in our country, because innovation, structural reforms, transformations are particularly needed in countries where the level of growth was so low in the last 20 or 25 years. So yes, implementation will be crucial. If it will work, we could be able to repeat this kind of experience, not making this permanent, but using the same method of issuing common debt or common purpose for other things, not necessarily other crises, maybe ambitious targets to pursue at European level. But if it doesn't work, of course, it will be much more difficult. So we have in our hands a wonderful opportunity to transform our economy, to address the climate transition with resources, and not only for countries with fiscal space, but we can't say that the climate transition will be addressed only by countries with fiscal space. The climate transition should be addressed by all European countries and all over the world, of course. But this will be possible with our common resources if we will be able to use them in the right way. So, exciting, extraordinary opportunity, and maybe we should concentrate in it a little bit more than we are doing now.
Sure, but then there's the obvious question. I mean, at least for us progressives, if this, again, it's a huge opportunity with some risks, how can we help? We progressives, I mean, in each of the countries, how can we help? What are the homeworks you're giving us?
I think that, of course, we have here first the must for us is there is a horizontal, enormous social dimensions in all the transformation that we are addressing. And this is for the innovation in the labor market and jobs. This is for the climate transition. We know that in the last couple of decades, inequalities grew all over the Western world, and not only the Western world, in an enormous way. Never had in our post-war history 2 decades with such an increase in inequalities between the first 10% and the rest of our societies. So the challenge here is very clear. I think that some decisions that we are taking, I mentioned before the agreement on multinational taxation, are going in this direction. But of course, sure is going in this direction, and the commitment that we were able to deliver at European level and was born from an initiative of the progressive forces in the European context and also in the Commission and in the Council. These are very good examples. Now we'll have the challenge, of course, of the social dimension of the climate transition. Very clearly among us, I think we should have the concept that when we stress the social dimension of the climate transition, we are not doing this to ignore or even to slow down the transition. Because if we look to more vulnerable people, both at global level, just look to the climate migration that it's already going on in several parts of the world, and in our countries, if we look to more vulnerable groups, more vulnerable people, we have the clear message that the one that will pay the higher cost of not addressing the climate transition will be the more vulnerable. So this is in itself a social mission to support this climate transition. But at the same time, we know that this climate transition will create new vulnerabilities, new differences in the labor market. Sectors will be especially affected. And so we will continuously insist on the fact that we have to support these sectors. If we don't support these sectors, if we think that only technology and technology breakthrough, that I hope will be there, will help us in this transition, and that we can let things go without taking care of those that are mostly in need, I think we run a big risk at a certain time to have the climate transition criticized, scrutinized, and made not so popular exactly among the people we are addressing and are supporting our parties, our movements. So the point is how to combine the fact that our progressive family is the stronger supporter of the climate transition. In my, in our commission, it is a socialist member, Franz Timmermans, in charge of this climate transition, and that proudly so, from my point of view. But at the same time, we should very seriously address these risks, and we are already experiencing this now with the increases in energy prices, the reactions that are taken from different governments to try to mitigate the impact of this increase of energy prices, etc. So we are in this mainstream of the climate transition with a special flag, but this special flag is not saying, please slow down. This special flag is saying, go ahead with strength and take care of people that needs to be taken care of.
Very good. But as they are telling us that we have a bit more time, right, Alex? I want to insist on that because I think it's crucial for us, and we have been discussing these 2 days, how we convince people that change, if it means progress, it's positive, it allows for hope, for a narrative of hope and a positive narrative for the future. But if we do not accompany this change, if we do not accompany these people, change is not safe, and thus it provides fear, right? So we need to combine these 2 things. I totally agree with you. Now, my doubt is to see if we have enough compensation mechanism. You yourself just put the example of energy prices and the efforts of governments to try to put this down, but they are, I mean, it seems to me, I'm not an expert on the issue, that we're going to have difficult months ahead, right? And that our compensation mechanism, we've seen that with inequality in these past few years, I think are well designed. I think, you know, the political will is put there, but the interdependence and the pressure of the forces makes it very difficult to compensate, right? So maybe we need more of this mechanism, flexible, short-term compensating mechanism to get to the long term.
Yes, indeed, I think that you know that we are all, not all, but many global players are committed to carbon neutrality for 2050. But in my view, the first decade of these 30 years, the decade we are entering in, will be probably the crucial one, because it's the one where the difference between what we have in terms of renewable at our disposal and what we need as increase of electricity capacity will be probably higher. If we work well in these 10 years, then this kind of difference will be reduced in the following two decades. Then I think it's not only a matter of compensation, because we should always remember what I mentioned before, that our intervention and effort for the climate transition is to avoid some risks that would affect particularly the more vulnerable parts of our world and our societies. But of course, this is not in itself sufficient. In recent meeting in Washington, I've heard a minister saying 55 years ago, we had a great American leader mobilizing people with the claim, we have a dream. Now we can't think to mobilize people with the claim, we have a nightmare. And this is quite understandable. This can't be our main message. We have a nightmare. But but we have to consider the fact that having the climate transition means avoiding for more vulnerable people from Africa to our own cities the most serious consequences of this crisis. At the same time, I think we should be presenting this climate transition for what it is. It is a huge opportunity to transform for the best our way of life, our way of moving, our way of eating, our way of heating our houses. And this is, I think, something that the young generations are understanding much better than my generation and others. So we are not only mobilized to avoid a nightmare, we are mobilized to build a better world, a better way of life. The famous beyond GDP message. No, the well-being, the common goods are not only measured by growth. Of course, growth is essential. And this is what the climate transition is about. And finally, of course, we have to mitigate the impact, especially in the short term. Because if the first hurdle, that is the one we are addressing now with this energy price increases, creates too many problems to the public consensus, to the transition, we have a problem. So the need is, I think, to stress that we are working to avoid very serious consequences, that we are working for a better way of life, because this is the climate transition, but that we are aware of the fact that we have several groups of people specially damaged that we have to support. If we don't do this, I think we are not respecting what is our cultural and political tradition, and we are missing our role in this transition.
No, sure. I agree completely. I mean, it's not to avoid a nightmare, it's to provide a better future for everybody. And that's why we have to move beyond GDP. I was to the seminar you did in Madrid on Monday, and I wrote down in my notebook the Robert Kennedy quote: is GDP includes everything that does not matter for the well-being of the people. So we need to go beyond that as just as a detailed policy of what we have so far. But my question was, in fact, in the mitigation and the compensation, not just to compensate, but the compensation mechanism in the short term. This is my fear for political backlash that can have this huge opportunity that we have. That's why I was asking, how can we help? How can everybody help? Because this is an engagement for everybody, civil society, parties, all that we can. We need to help in making understand that this transition is not easy, that we may not have all the short-term mechanisms to compensate, although we need to work hard to find them, but as with these energy prices, it's not going to be easy, but we still have to keep going, right? So I think...
Yes, and we have to work here also in the connection between national responses that are there in protecting vulnerable households, in intervening in the electricity bills, and on temporary intervening in taxation, not permanently, because this would undermine, of course, the climate transition. How can we join to these national responses a stronger European response? This is a matter of big discussion. It was discussed 1 week ago in the European Council with, I have to say, not identical opinions, to be very diplomatic, among our leaders, but some messages are common. First is to try to, well, here it's a little bit technical, but to try to avoid the distortions in the markets of the emission trade system that we have in the European Union. Because this market has become a market where financial speculation is very active. We have financial entities edging the price of carbon at levels extremely high, and these has consequences for our energy markets and prices. Second, there is the problem, the big question mark is, could we have a common procurement of gas at European level? You know that gas is the problem triggering this, at the moment, triggering this energy prices increase. Of course, one could say, why not on the basis of the extraordinary experience that we had with vaccines? Well, we had also difficult moments, by the way. I remember in January, February, the European Commission was not the most popular among European governments on this common procurement. But that then at the end, not at the end, quite soon, it became a success story, incredible success story. So now we distributed 855 million doses in Europe, and we exported 1 billion doses in 60 foreign countries. This, I think, is something no other global player was able to do in the last year. And this was because of the common procurement. The common procurement not only avoided tensions among neighbors or black market, it was a great success. But of course, one thing is common procurement of vaccines. You are dealing with Pfizer, AstraZeneca, and others. Different thing is the common procurement of gas, where, of course, the geopolitical dimension is there. So I think that we have to try this work stream, connecting it to all the debate that we are having in Europe on our geopolitical role, which is not an easy debate. You know that the definition in itself gives you the sense of how this discussion is not easy. We call it an open strategic autonomy, which is something like a festival of oxymoron from a certain point of view. But the open strategic autonomy means that we should be more autonomous on energy and gas, and using our common force also in this kind of negotiation could be helpful. So it's, I think, important that we work also in this direction. But it is not done. It is not something that you can do in a snapshot, I have to say. So then we can go on for long, but I don't know, it's you to decide when.
Well, actually not me. I'm just, they put me a signal saying, yes, go ahead. I think we have time for another question, Alex. And I'm glad you mentioned strategic autonomy or this addition of oxymorons. Yeah. Otherwise, Lucia would kill me because she said, you need to ask about strategic autonomy because it's such an important issue. But let me shift. I think we have talked for a while now about opportunities and challenges of this big moment of recovery. Let me shift to the more political side. We have lived stressed years, right? We had the financial crisis, the insufficient response. We had Brexit, we have all the populist wave. And as I said before, I'm completely biased, let me say it up front, but I really do think we can inaugurate this social democratic moment, but you are a privileged observer of European politics. Do you think that Europe is now politically stronger in integration-wise, in taking care of its own values of what democracy really means, and that this could go hand in hand with this opportunity that is provided with the recovery plan?
Well, I would say potentially yes, because the populist sovereignists, we call them frequently here in Europe, didn't have a good management of this crisis. It was not their crisis. I'm quite...
Actually, it was inversely proportional. The more populist and authoritarian you were, the less...
Yes.
The worse the management of the COVID.
I've heard a Bulgarian political scientist, Igor Krasnev, saying that frequently populists are able to manage the crisis that they create, or they encourage, they increase, like migration, but they are not so strong in managing crisis that happens. And this was the case. This crisis put on the agenda the importance of science, of the welfare state, of multilateralism, of cooperation among people, of seriousness, of competence, all a lot of things completely out of the view of this populist wave that we had before. But at the same time, are we out of the woods with these risks? Well, of course not. You know very well that we have now a difficult discussion at the EU level with some governments about the rule of law, the independence of the judiciary. But apart from this, which is part of the problem is that they will try again to put in the agenda the issues that were fueling this populist wave in the previous decade. And the first of this is, unfortunately, migration. I think this issue, which is very hot now, both in America and in some countries, is less important in the whole of Europe than it was 5 or 6 years ago. But this is their real fuel. And here we have to be very honest among us. I think that progressive forces should not have the same position that populists and sovereignists have on migration. I understand differences, of course, because there are different interests, different stories from country to country, but the right of asylum, the capacity of having legal migration, which is helpful for our economy, should be a common point of view for all progressives all over Europe. And unfortunately, this is not always the case. So we have a problem also among us to stress the need to have a common position, because otherwise, if the populist attitude is contagious, look at what happens in the France political spectrum on the issue of migration. If it is contagious, we are in difficulty. So I'm seeing that no, okay, I don't know.
You are like me. No, but yeah, it's true. I mean, we don't have to have it's a complete. It's in our ADN, no, in our base. These values for migration, but we need to push for a common foreign and defense policy. And
yes,
this is a typical thing we always say, but then, you know, it is easier said than done. In any case, it seems that now, yes, we need to we need to stop. Sorry for this abrupt moderation. Honestly, it's not an easy position.
Defense was
I was powerless. It was Matt Brown's fault. But thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Grazie. Thank you.
Scusa, ma veramente no.
No, non sto centrale. Good evening, everyone. We arrived at the final panel of the Global Progress Summit, and we are going to discuss about progressive future, and we are going to do that with very prominent guests tonight. But before, let me launch the video of someone who cannot be with us tonight, but she wanted anyway to give her message for this important event, the New Zealand Prime Minister, Jacinta Ardern.
My name is Jacinda Ardern. I'm the Prime Minister of Aotearoa, New Zealand, and also the leader of the New Zealand Labour Party. Now, I'm excited to send this message to the Global Progress Rome Summit today. And while I'm sorry I can't be there in person, I'm at least glad to be able to join you virtually this year. I'd like to say a particular hello to Prime Minister Sanchez, leader of the Partito Democratico, Enrico Letta, and to Vice Chancellor Scholz, along with everyone in the Global Progress team. You know, if the last 24 months have taught us anything, it is that whilst we have been divided, separated, and in some cases geographically isolated, especially down here at the bottom of the world, we are also more united than ever. Every call I've had with a world leader in recent times has come first and foremost to a conversation about the impacts of the global pandemic that is COVID-19 on our people, our populations, our economy. But every time I talk to a progressive, that conversation quickly turns into how during this period we can work more closely together, how we can ensure that as we build back, we just don't restore our countries and our economies and support our people, but we build back in a way that is true to our progressive values, that we ensure that we are creating sustainable economies, that we are mindful of ensuring that we are future-proofing our economies for the challenge of climate change, that we are building an equitable rebuild, that we're ensuring we're bringing everyone with us, including women, our Indigenous communities, and our most vulnerable. These are the challenges and opportunities that sit before all of us at this time. But in order to achieve that at a global scale, this is where we need to keep sharing ideas. This is where linking in with one another is so critical. And so whilst I'm at a distance from you now, I hope in the future to be able to join you in person, and I'm particularly looking forward to being able to see the outcomes of the work from this summit. I wish you all the very best in Rome, but also in Glasgow. The world and the progressive family is counting on it.
And now please help me to welcome on stage the Spanish Prime Minister, Mr. Pedro Sanchez. Please. Germany Finance Minister, but future Chancellor, Olaf Scholz. And the Secretary General of Partito Democratico, Enrico Letta. So, Mr. Letta, you are the host here, and I'm going to start with you tonight. You just come from an important win in the local election, but actually we can say that there is a kind of progressive wave that started in the United States last year and then continue. We have seen the success in Canada, of course, in Germany, and in some other countries, and then your victory with the local election in Italy. Why do you think this is the moment during this pandemic crisis in which progressive movements are doing so good?
First of all, thank you so much. Welcome to Rome once again. I'm very pleased to be here with Olaf and with Pedro Thank you very much for having accepted our invitation, and thank you, of course, John. Thank you, Patrick and Matt. It's a great opportunity to be here and to share also some ideas on that. I have to say that my point is the fact that I see a sort of fil rouge among all the different victories and what we are doing in the different countries. And the fil rouge is the way in which we are feeling the change, the way in which we are trying to live with the change, and the way in which we are not there to stop the change, but we are there to try to make the change better, because it is clear that there are important changes in our societies, in demographic terms, in generational terms. I was sharing with Olaf and Pedro how tough was for us this week with this law against homotransphobia, with the opposition of all the different rights parties in our parliament. And it is the typical topic where you have a generational divide. You have 90% of youth in favor of this kind of laws, and you have a more cautious approach from the rest of generations. And the same is also for other topics where diversity is an opportunity for a part of the society, but diversity seems to be also a threat for the rest of the society. So I think my key point is the fact that the fil rouge is to be able not to stop the change, to push the change, but at the same time to be able not to consider the change in a pessimistic way or leaving the people alone. I think loneliness is one of the key points and one of the main problems today. People feeling to be alone after 1.5 years at home is one of the key issues. In a situation in which personal relations, family relations are so weak, I think politics can play a role. This is why my point is that we need to try to launch new ideas and new framework of ideas where the key point is politics as community, politics as the way to create links, and politics is the key point is to be aware of the fact that people are afraid of the change. And we have not to blame people because of that. Because if we blame people because of that, I think at the end of the day, the reaction is a negative one. And this is the key point for the right. The right parties are there exactly to be there and to work on the fact that people are alone, and to exploit the fact that people are alone and try to exploiting these aspects for raising fears and the rest. I think we are able to go further, and this is exactly what happened in Italy. I think we won elections because we were very, very clear and very coherent in the fact that we want to get out, we want to go further. Future is a positive future of growth if we are able to respect rules. And for the first time, maybe in our 30 years of center left in Italy, we were those of the words freedom and security. That is not, for us, it's a sort of revolution, because these two words were not familiar for us, or were not familiar for us in the perception of the people. And in this very period, I think freedom and security were the important terms, and these important terms were for us very, very crucial also to the organization of our response. So my point is that, and I think it is the same also in Spain, in Germany, in the rest of Europe, we were able to reassure people, and to reassure people that there will be a future. The future is in cooperation, I take the opportunity to say hello to Paolo Gentiloni and to the important work that the European Commission is doing in that direction, and to say, yes, we are there, we are cooperating all together, and also the fact that Europe gave a fantastic response to this crisis. And Olaf, I always say that the reasons why Europe gave a fantastic and positive response to the crisis this time in comparison with 10 years ago, we had 3 reasons. First reason, it was because of the fact that we learned previous lessons. And learning previous lessons, it was so crucial and so important to understand it. Another reason was the fact that we were all aware that it was necessary to have a proactive initiative. And third reason, you were there instead of Schäuble, because Schäuble was there 10 years ago in the same position in which you were, and the attitude of Schäuble was the attitude to say, okay, everywhere, everyone alone, without a general response from the European Union. That was a very bad signal. This time, we gave a common response. And I have to say that we are together and stronger together, I think, is the European mood. And we, the progressives, we are the pillars of this stronger together.
Thank you, Secretary. And you were saying the importance of freedom and security as progressive words right now. But another maybe word which is very important as a fil rouge among all the progressive movement is climate. Prime Minister Sanchez, you are here for the G20, and then of course there is also the COP26 coming on. So climate represents the real challenge for the next generation. And it's not just from, of course, environmental crisis around the world, but it could also be an opportunity when it comes to the creation of new kind of jobs. How you are addressing the climate crisis, and how do you think that progressive movement should put forward this important issue?
First of all, let me say thank you to all of you, especially to Enrico for having me.
Wait a second, maybe there is a problem with the microphone. Is this working, or?
So thank you, Enrico. Thank you, the Global Progress, for inviting me and having the opportunity to meet Olaf, Enrico, and all of you in this great city of Rome. No? Just to answer to your question, but following the reflection made by Enrico, I would say that over the past 20, 30 years, even for socialists or progressives political forces, we've been always reflecting how many ways do we have, or the political system have. So we were thinking about 2 ways, even a 3rd way, but afterwards, after all the experience that we witnessed over these 20, 30 years, I would say that there's only one way, and that way is or advance or to go back. And for advancing societies, we need to reform. And the political forces and the political project that represents fairly what does it mean to be a reformer is the progressive forces that we are here. So this is crucial to answer to your question, because the ecological transition is something that the private sector already knows is going to happen. And also when you speak with other political forces, for instance, the Greens, they, of course, answer to the question of the ecological transition. But the difference between them and us is that we consider that this ecological transition must be done in a fair matter. And this is crucial for us, to speak to the people that digitalization and ecological transition means good things for them, to be optimism, to identify all these reforms and transformations with opportunities for them and for the children. So this is what I'm trying to do in Spain, to implement reforms, to deliver reforms, but also to do it in a fairer manner. And to me, this is the big difference between the socialists, the progressive forces, with other political forces. by the way, with whom we could, of course, share a road. But in the end, who or the political forces that really give a positive answer to this transition always are the progressive forces. So really, I think, and this is what I'm trying always in Spain to answer, is that in the end, there's only one way, or either we advance on social rights, on a fairer manner to address these huge and disruptive revolutions, the digital and the ecological transition, and of course on freedoms, or either we go back. And unfortunately, what we are witnessing in Europe is that the center-right parties are advocating and buying the speeches and the ideological framework of the far-right parties. This is happening in Italy, and unfortunately is also happening in Spain. But also that gave us a huge opportunity to explain to many people, not only from our ideology, that the road that we are signaling is the road for advancing and advancing our societies.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Sanchez. And Minister Schulz, we're going to then discuss also about the challenge of digitalization that Prime Minister was talking about. But before, when we think about the crisis and the COVID crisis, that let us all understand the importance of a welfare state. Even in the US, now they're putting forward some kind of reforms that look at the European welfare state as a possible model to follow. So I would like to ask you what lesson we have learned from this COVID crisis when it comes to the way in which we rule our economy and our welfare. That's for you.
I think it is necessary to go through a crisis with a successful welfare state, which has a good health system, and all people learned that this is the case in our country and in many other countries as well. We learned that there are a lot of things to do to make them better, but comparing our countries with others, they understood that it is good to have this. So I see that there is a new stabilization for the idea of a state that is able to be successful in questions of social security. On the other hand, it showed that solidarity and cooperation is necessary in a big crisis like this. And when we started to develop our programs for stabilizing the economy, for the recovery later, and for the European programs to do so, there was a big understanding that this is necessary. And that there are two lessons now the people learned. It is good to have this welfare state and a good governance, in the end how a state is run. And the second is that we knew that it's necessary to do something that the economy will not suffer for decades from a crisis like this, but that it could recover. And this is what we managed to do.
Thank you, Minister. And Secretary Letta, one of the main answers to the crisis from the European Union has been the Next Generation EU area, also with Commissioner Gentiloni, that was one of the architects behind all of that. But of course, we are already thinking about what next. The Next Generation EU has been an incredible experiment, also in the way in which you put together different sensibility across Europe, as you were saying before, but could be also a model for the future.
First of all, I think what's next for Next Generation EU is first to spend this money in a proper way, in an effective way, very fast. And I have to say that I'm very happy that Pedro is here, because it's first of all Spain and Italy there. And we know very well that we have a great responsibility because we are there to show that this idea of Next Generation EU is the good one. And the idea was good, and the idea is good if we spend this money showing that we are able to reform, as Pedro said, and to reform to have more growth, more inclusive growth, and to be able to spend fast and money and not to be there with all. And of course, I mentioned my own country, with all the usual bureaucratic problems. We had always some problems in spending in a proper way or in the most effective way the European money. So it is absolutely necessary first to be effective in the implementation. But I have to say that in my view there's another key point. And the other key point is the fact that for political reasons, Next Generation EU was conceived as national. European money, but national implementation. Europeanization of debt, national programs. I have to say that here I see one limit of Next Generation EU. And I think we have to consider thinking the future that if we want to be competitive with China and the US, we have not to limit ourselves as pillars of national programs and having only national programs. Because the dimension of all the national programs we are trying today to create is not enough for the need of a Europe that needs to be competitive with the US and China. So my guess, and I think it will be on the table of the future, if we are able to spend this money in a proper way, next step will be to create and to invent a Next Generation EU at European level. How to have not only the sequence of 27 national plans with 27 domestic projects without any dialogue among each other, because this is the key problem in my view. We need to have cross-border projects, European projects on research, on sustainability, on industry, and I think this is the main limit of the present Next Generation EU, and I think it is the need for us. So I would like to think that what we are doing today is important also for the future. I'm very confident also because I see what Italy is doing, what the Italian government is doing. We are supporting Draghi's government also because Draghi is very clear. We were together in Barcelona, Pedro, when we discussed on these topics before summer. And you and Draghi, you were absolutely on the same track on this point. We need now to be very serious in the implementation of Next Generation EU, and at the same time we have to think how can we organize European projects for the future on these topics. I think this will be what next, and the answer to what next. And if we want to be successful at world level, if we want to avoid that Europe is only the sum of 27 domestic projects and without any chance or any possibility to be competitive with the US and China, I think we need to be together also in the creation and also in the implementation of European projects with European money and European projects too.
And, we were talking so far about the positive things, this progressive way that is coming forward. But at the same time, we are seeing in a very violent way also here in Italy, the rising in the past years also of the far right, neo-fascist movement, neo-Frankist movement. And I would like to ask you, what is according to you the role of the social media platform in that, and how we can protect democracy in the digital era?
Well, that's a very, very important question that definitely I would need help to answer. But just let me signal some ideas or reflections. The first one, I think, is attitude. Because in the end, well, regressive movements such as the ones that you mentioned always increase their social support when there is resignation among population, negative mood among population, and no horizon. So I think that the force and the strength of progressive forces is always to draw new horizons for our citizens. and always not to forget that we govern for the majority, and not to forget that we are always political forces that we want to engage the majority of the society in a very inclusive political project. So instead of blaming the other, instead of playing the same ideological mark or framework that they want to play, I think that with the attitude of optimism, with bridging or building bridges with different social and civil society is something that give us a political difference with all these narratives and political movements that we are witnessing across Europe. That is why it's so important when I listen to Enrico defending that, of course, we need to speak about civil rights. In Spain, for instance, we spoke about euthanasia. And I said, look, we are going to deliver a law on euthanasia, which, by the way, is supported not only from the progressive citizens, but also for, among among the population. There's perhaps 70%, 80% of the population, no matter what are their orientation when voting for this kind of laws and civil rights and freedoms. So I think there's a kind of attitude of positivism, optimism, but also to deliver and to send clear message. What does it mean to be governed by a progressive government or a progressive political forces? Because in the end, also citizens need to be or to receive clarity of ideas and a clear political message and a clear horizon. In the end, people, what they need from their political leaders is a vision, is determination, is an attitude and the skills to build up in this complex world and complex societies that we are living, the capacity to build majorities and to advance our societies. So I consider that this debate on social media, fake news, of course, are so important that I don't have the answer. But I know that in the end, basic rules that always works in politics, such as the attitude, such as the proximity, such as speaking the same language that our citizens, such as not forgetting that there's always a rational component of politics, but also the emotional component of politics. It is crucial to, in the end, to overcome these terrible regressive movements that we are witnessing in our countries. This is what I'm trying to do it in Spain. Sometimes, it is always difficult because we are living and passing through very complex and difficult moments. But I do believe that in the end, people need this kind of attitudes and horizons. In the end, what I see in my country and in many countries is that when progressive forces lose elections is when we consider that we are, resignate societies with no positive horizons, and this is something that we cannot, accept. This is something that we cannot accept. I think that the majority of the people, what they want really is, to advance. And to me, if I have to synthesize what does it mean to be progressive nowadays in the 21st century, is, to advance and to deliver, and not to forget the people behind, but, advance all together, because, in the end, this is what the people really, really needs, and this is what we are here, and we are in politics.
Thank you. And Minister Scholz talking about not leaving people behind. In your electoral campaign, you insist a lot about the importance of the working class and recreating a bond with the working class. And you were very sensitive always about the fear that working class could have. One of those is linked to the digital transition that we were discussing before. What is the recipe to put forward a new kind of digital economy, but at the same time protecting the jobs?
Looking at the German elections, but also at the political development in all the rich countries of the industrialized West, to be very clear on this question, I think we see problems that have made it really difficult for progressive parties to succeed. And we can see now there is a change with the election of Biden, with the elections we have had in Europe now and now in Germany. And one of the answers to the problems of the past is that we understand that things changed. And so one of the main messages of my campaign was about respect, recognition, about the way that we want to cooperate and live together in our societies. And yes, we were very successful as social democratic parties in the past with opening the education system to many people that have not had the best chances to high degrees and good jobs in the past. And if you look at the three of us, you see that we are more or less one of the consequences of this progressive politics of the past. I am a lawyer and I have a good income. I'm coming from a big city, but this is not the whole world. And I have to say that for some times, possibly the public messages of progressive parties were not the right ones, because those who are doing the jobs, who are running the trains, who are working on the streets, who in the plants, who are doing the jobs in a shop, they have the same respect and recognition as the others. And if we want to be successful, we must create a society where not one is looking down to the other, where we understand us as the same level and that we have the same part of supporting the society as all the others. And so it is important that we discuss on this question in campaigns, but in all the politics we do afterwards. It was about minimum wage in my campaign, about better legislation for work conditions in the plants and at all the working places in the country. It was on the pension scheme, yes, also. But it was also on the question that we work on the question of recognition, respect, and that we are a common society with common values, and that we want to work on political and cultural cohesion in our society as something that has to be achieved. And when we look back to the development of the last 10, 20 years, this was not always clear with progressive parties and with social democratic parties, because we just stuck to the one question of opening up the society, but it is not the only question of our societies. We have to continue to do this work with better education and opportunities for many people in our countries, but we have also to develop a society where someone who is just working somewhere is getting the right recognition and the support by politics we are developing. This is the one question. And the second is about what the two others said about optimism, about confidence on the future. And to be very clear, especially in our countries, many people are not really sure if this will be a society good for them or their children or for people that are like them in 10, 20 or 30 years. And when we do politics and discuss about modernization and industrial modernization, it is absolutely key that we have an idea that this will work for the people also. And so this is what we have to do today. When we discuss about a digital revolution and about a better digital society in Europe, it must be a story that is good for workers as well, and it must be central for all what we do, that this is feasible and a perspective that could be followed and is working economically. And this is the same when we discuss about fighting against climate change. Yes, we have to do it, But doing so is the biggest industrial modernization process for more than 100 years in our societies. If we will rely much more on electricity as today, if we go out of the use of fossil resources as we use them today, gas, coal, and oil, this will change all the ways of production we have in our societies. But if we manage to organize this in a way that there will be good jobs in the industrial area in 10, 20, and 30 years, and that this will be even more likely if we do it now and if we do it in the right way, we will have the chance to have the support of the people in the factories in all our countries as well. And when I discussed in my campaign with the workers at the steel factories, in the chemical industry, in the car industry, in the machine building industry, they were absolutely aware of that we are living in a time where this decision has to be made, that it is done in a way that they have good chances for jobs in the next 10, 20, and 30 years. And just to describe the side effect, the world we live in will have 10 billion inhabitants in 2050, more or less. And we will be 400 million in the European Union. There will be strong countries in the world. They will be economically and technically successful. What we could achieve is that we are on the highest level as well, and that the wealth for the people in our countries will be at the highest level that could be reached in the world. But it is a different world to the one we lived in 20, 30 years ago, where the people in our countries could be sure that what we can do technically is different to what the people can do in the rest of the world. This will change. But to create a future that is good for the people in our countries, having this in mind and managing this future, this is the basis for success for a progressive party, but also for this confidence and optimism that has been explained already by Pedro and Enrico.
Secretary Letta, we are arriving at the end of this conversation. We have touched different and interesting subjects, and there is a positive message coming forward that at the end optimism is the key. But it's also true that we are seeing not just this, let's say, anti-systemic movement coming forward, but even in proper government, we are seeing some threat to democracy, to the rule of law. I'm referring, for instance, to Poland and the recent crisis between Warsaw and Brussels. So I would like to ask you, to close this conversation, what progressive movement can do in this behalf to protect the rule of law, also when the enemy is not an anti-systemic force, but it's a proper government.
I think last year we understood how important is Europe for all of us. Without Europe, it would have been impossible to solve the crisis. Without Europe, it would have been impossible for our governments to give solutions. Without Europe, it would have been impossible to be positive for the future. This is why I think the threat coming from the Constitutional Court in Poland is something that we have not to underestimate. In my view, it is maybe the most important threat that we had since many, many years. And it is a threat because it is not just on one topic, but it is a general idea on a different ranking and priority of laws, and it is not just a legal debate. It is on the way in which we consider our societies, right of the people, human rights, rule of law. At the end of the day, the key discussion about the way in which our societies are organized, the way in which, for instance, we think the role of men and women, it is clear that there's a point a key point. Behind this position of the Constitutional Court, or behind what the Hungarian government or the Polish government are doing, there's the idea that society is organized around a family where the man is up and where the woman is on a different position. Society where the role of minorities is completely marginalized. Societies where the role of the judiciary system, the role of the press, I can continue, we know of course what I mean. I would like to say that it is time for the European Union to be very clear on all these points. And it is time for all of us also to say that we are together because we stand for these values. And we stand for these values because we think it is the way in which Europe is strong at world level, and we can't be attacked at home. Because all what is happening today is, of course, creating an enormous weakness for the way in which, for instance, we blame China or we blame other countries in the world. How can we be credible having not the way to resolve or to solve the problem at home? So my point is that the crucial fight is on this point, on the legal aspects, but it is also on the political aspect. Because first of all, we have to be able to have this separation between the Hungarian government, the Polish government, and the Hungarian people and the Polish people. Because it is not Poland, it is not Hungary, is Orban, is Morawiecki, is Fidesz, is PiS. It is something different. And I'm sure that we have to be confident with the fact that the people of Hungary and the people of Poland will be able to change all of it. But at the same time, I think this political fight obliges us to be stronger together. Because in my view, maybe it is because Italy is the country maybe more interested to what happened in July. But in July, the document of the 16 parties at European level around the leadership of Fidesz and PiS, of course, having on board Marine Le Pen or Vox or two big parties in Italy, having today 40% of the members of the Italian delegation to the European Parliament, because Lega and Fratelli d'Italia, they represent today, and Brando and Irene, they know better than I do what does it mean, having 40% of our member of the Italian delegation there with Orban and with Morawiecki and with Le Pen and the rest. And it is clear that for Europe and for the European integration is a threat, because it is the first time since the beginning, since the creation of the European Union, that there's a consolidation, a fusion of all the anti-European oppositions. It's the first time they signed a document altogether. And it is the first time that this document is able to be present also in the biggest European countries. And it is not just, I repeat, a legal or, I would say, theoretical discussion. For instance, just one example about something that is very crucial for all our three countries, migrations. It is impossible to have an agreement on a strong migration policy at European level with these countries and with these governments. And they have the veto right to stop the possibility to have a comprehensive agreement. So I think we have to think how these oppositions are there, and they are really crucial. On migration, I think it is time to start thinking to a sort of Schengen of migrations with the willing countries. I can't see the way to find an agreement with Orban on migration policy or something similar. But at the end of the day, the key issue is that we are the only group of people, of parties, able to raise the flag and to have a strong fight and battle on these topics. Because we know very well that the others are weaker than us, or they are in difficulty, because EPP is in clear difficulty on this topic. And we are there to be clearly the way in which the European Union is able to try to react to this attack and to be able to show to the people how important is Europe. I have to say, and it's my final word, that in Italy we are used to strong emotions. We are the country, like Spain, of strong emotions. But last year, we get the lowest level of pro-European approach in the polls for our people. This year, we are getting one of the highest level of the pro-European approach in the last 20 years. That is the signal that people today are giving trust to the European Union. So it is time to be able to give a long-distance project for our continent. I have to say that at the end of this meeting, I'm very happy to know that in the next European Council meeting, I don't know if in December or in the next one in spring, Olaf will be there representing Germany, the most important European country. And I have to say that you, with Pedro, with Mario Draghi, with Antonio Costa, you will be able, I think, with all our support, to try to consider that Europe is crucial for all our electoral campaign. We lost in the last decade because the response of the European Union to the crisis 10 years ago was so weak. We are winning today because we had a great European common response. And I think it is the consideration that our common work is fundamental for all of us, is our future, and meetings like the one that we just had are crucial also for our future. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Secretary. You know, there is a way of saying that in Italy we are not on time, but I think it's a fake news because we are perfectly on time. And thank you for this conversation, for all the food of thoughts that you gave us during this final panel. Thank you to Prime Minister Sanchez, to Minister Scholz, and to the Secretary Letta.